Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carried another heavy equipment bag across the scorching Nevada desert training ground. The sun blazed overhead, and dust clouds swirled around her boots with each step. To everyone watching, she looked like just another support staff member helping the Navy SEALs prepare for their classified training exercise. "Hey, helper girl, grab that radio equipment and move it to the comm tent," barked Petty Officer Thompson, barely glancing in her direction. Sarah nodded silently and hefted the 40-pound case without complaint. She had grown used to being invisible, just another face in the crowd of contractors and support personnel who kept the military machine running smoothly. What none of them knew was that Sarah Martinez held the rank of Lieutenant Commander in Naval Intelligence, with security clearances that exceeded most of the SEALs she was supposedly serving. For the past 6 months, she had been operating under deep cover, investigating suspected security leaks within the Special Operations community. Her mission required her to blend in completely, to become so unremarkable that seasoned warriors would discuss sensitive matters freely in her presence. The assignment had been brutal on her ego. Sarah had graduated summa cum laude from the Naval Academy, earned her master's degree in international relations from Georgetown, and spent 8 years building a distinguished career in intelligence operations. She had briefed admirals, analyzed threats in war zones, and coordinated with CIA operatives on missions she could never discuss. Yet here she was, pretending to struggle with equipment that she could operate better than most of the men ordering her around. "Sarah, right?" called out Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez as she approached the communications tent. "Make sure those frequencies are properly calibrated. We can't afford any screw-ups during tomorrow's exercise." "Yes, Chief," she replied in the meek voice she had perfected for this role. Inside, she wanted to tell him that she had designed communication protocols for operations far more complex than this training scenario. Instead, she ducked into the tent and began her work, knowing that her real job was just beginning. As the day progressed, Sarah's keen intelligence training allowed her to piece together conversations and observe behavioral patterns that would have escaped casual notice. She watched as Lieutenant Blake consistently stepped away to take private phone calls, noted how Petty Officer Davis seemed unusually interested in operational timelines, and observed the way certain team members exchanged glances when specific mission details were discussed. The evening brought a welcome break from the desert heat, but Sarah's work was far from over. She volunteered for kitchen duty, knowing that mess halls were gold mines for intelligence gathering. Tired soldiers often let their guard down over hot meals and cold drinks, sharing information they would never discuss in formal briefings. "That new exercise tomorrow is going to be intense," she overheard one SEAL telling his teammate. "Good thing the brass doesn't know about the modifications we made to the original plan." Sarah's ears perked up. Unauthorized modifications to training exercises could indicate either harmless initiative or something more sinister. She continued washing dishes, appearing completely absorbed in her mundane task, while mentally cataloging every detail of the conversation. Later that night, as she lay in her assigned bunk in the support staff quarters, Sarah reviewed the day's intelligence in her mind. 3 suspicious phone calls, 2 unauthorized plan modifications, and 1 SEAL who seemed overly curious about operational security measures. None of it was conclusive evidence, but patterns were beginning to emerge. Her thoughts were interrupted by footsteps outside the barracks. Through the thin walls, she could hear hushed voices engaged in what sounded like an argument. Sarah slipped quietly to the window, using skills learned during her intelligence training to position herself where she could listen without being detected. "The timeline has to change," one voice insisted. "If we stick to the original schedule, everything falls apart." "Too risky," replied another voice. "Too many people are already suspicious." Sarah's pulse quickened. This conversation was definitely not about legitimate training modifications. She strained to identify the speakers, but the voices were too muffled by distance and desert wind. All she could determine was that at least 2 people were involved in whatever scheme was unfolding. The next morning brought increased activity as the training exercise prepared to commence. Sarah threw herself into her support role with renewed purpose, knowing that today might provide the breakthrough her investigation needed. She helped distribute ammunition, checked communication equipment, and performed countless other tasks that kept her close to the action without arousing suspicion. Admiral Richardson arrived unexpectedly just before the exercise began, bringing a small entourage of senior officers for an impromptu inspection. Sarah watched from the sidelines as the distinguished leader reviewed the training preparations, noting how certain SEALs seemed uncomfortable with the increased scrutiny. "Everything looks excellent, Commander Walsh," the Admiral told the exercise leader. "I'm particularly interested in observing how your team handles the communication protocols during high-stress scenarios." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. If someone was planning to compromise the exercise, the Admiral's presence would either force them to abort their plan or accelerate it dangerously. She positioned herself near the communications station, ready to intervene if necessary while maintaining her cover as a helpful support technician. The exercise began with textbook precision. Teams moved through their objectives with the smooth efficiency that made Navy SEALs legendary. Sarah monitored radio frequencies while appearing to perform routine maintenance, listening for any signs that the suspicious activity she had detected was coming to fruition. Then, 30 minutes into the exercise, everything changed. A communication came through on a frequency that should have been unused, containing coded language that Sarah immediately recognized as potentially hostile intelligence traffic. Someone was using the training exercise as cover for an unauthorized transmission, possibly revealing sensitive information to outside parties. Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her career. Intervening would blow her cover and potentially compromise months of investigation. But allowing a security breach to continue could endanger national security and put American lives at risk. As she watched the Admiral observing the exercise with obvious pride in his sailors, she realized that some secrets were too dangerous to keep. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she isolated the suspicious frequency and began recording the transmission. Years of intelligence training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but the gravity of what she was witnessing threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. The coded message was definitely not part of the authorized exercise, and its content suggested that someone was providing real-time operational intelligence to an unauthorized recipient. Making a split-second decision, Sarah activated a secure communication device hidden in her equipment bag and sent an encrypted message to her handler at Naval Intelligence. The message was brief but urgent. "Blackbird compromised. Active breach in progress. Require immediate backup." Within minutes, she received a coded response authorizing her to take whatever action necessary to prevent further security violations. Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with apprehension. After months of playing the invisible helper, she was about to step back into her real role as a naval intelligence officer. The challenge was determining who among the SEALs was responsible for the breach. Sarah had identified several suspicious individuals during her investigation, but the unauthorized transmission could be coming from any of them. She needed to catch the perpetrator in the act while minimizing risk to the ongoing exercise and the Admiral's safety. Using her position near the communication equipment, Sarah began systematically monitoring each team member's location and activities. Lieutenant Blake was currently engaged in a mock assault on the primary objective, making it unlikely he was transmitting. Petty Officer Davis was providing overwatch from an elevated position, but his radio traffic was limited to standard tactical communications. Then she spotted him. Petty Officer First Class Martinez was positioned at a secondary communication relay, ostensibly monitoring backup frequencies for the exercise. But Sarah could see him operating equipment that wasn't part of the standard setup, and his body language suggested he was engaged in covert activity. Sarah faced another critical decision. She could alert base security immediately, but that would likely result in a dramatic arrest that could compromise other aspects of the investigation. Alternatively, she could attempt to gather more evidence by maintaining surveillance, but that risked allowing additional classified information to be transmitted. The Admiral's voice crackled over the radio, calling for a status update from all teams. As the various SEAL units reported their positions and progress, Sarah noticed that Martinez was simultaneously transmitting on his unauthorized frequency. He was literally selling out his teammates' positions in real time, potentially exposing them to hostile action if this information reached the wrong hands. The realization that American lives were at immediate risk dissolved any remaining hesitation. Sarah abandoned her support station and began moving toward Martinez's position, using terrain features and equipment to mask her approach. Her years of field training kicked in as she planned her route to minimize exposure, while maximizing her chances of catching the traitor in the act. As she drew closer, Sarah could hear Martinez speaking in low tones into his unauthorized radio equipment. The language he was using wasn't the standard military communication protocol, and she could make out enough to understand that he was providing detailed information about SEAL capabilities and future training schedules. "Alpha Team is moving to secondary position," Martinez whispered into his device. "Exercise concludes at 1400 hours. Next training cycle begins Tuesday with urban warfare scenarios." Sarah felt sick. This wasn't just about compromising a training exercise. Martinez was providing intelligence that could be used to target American Special Operations Forces in real combat situations. The information he was transmitting could get SEALs killed in actual missions around the world. Drawing on her combat training, Sarah approached Martinez from his blind spot, timing her movement to coincide with explosions from the training exercise that would mask any noise. When she was close enough to act, she took a deep breath and stepped out of concealment. "Petty Officer Martinez, step away from the unauthorized communication equipment," she commanded in a voice that carried unmistakable authority. Martinez spun around, his face showing shock and confusion. "What? Lady, you need to get back to your support duties. This is a restricted area." "I said step away from the equipment," Sarah repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You're transmitting classified information on an unauthorized frequency, and you're under investigation for violations of the Espionage Act." The color drained from Martinez's face as he realized his situation had changed dramatically. "You're just a contractor. You don't have any authority here." Sarah pulled out her military identification and held it where Martinez could see it. "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, Naval Intelligence. You're looking at a federal officer and you're under arrest." The irony of their shared last name wasn't lost on either of them, but Sarah remained focused on securing the evidence and preventing any further transmission of classified material. Martinez's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Sarah was ready for that response. "Don't make this worse than it already is," she warned. "There are 50 armed SEALs within shouting distance, and they're not going to be happy when they learn what you've been doing." Martinez's shoulders slumped as the full reality of his situation sank in. The unauthorized radio crackled with an incoming transmission from whoever was receiving his intelligence, but he no longer made any move to respond. Sarah quickly secured the communication equipment and called for backup using her official credentials. Within minutes, base security arrived along with representatives from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service who had been standing by since her earlier alert. The training exercise was quietly suspended as Admiral Richardson was briefed on the situation. Sarah watched from a distance as Martinez was led away in restraints, knowing that her months of careful investigation had finally paid off. But she also knew that this arrest was likely just the beginning of a much larger investigation into how deep the security breach extended. Commander Walsh approached her as the scene was being secured. "Lieutenant Commander, I owe you an apology. If I had known who you were, I would have—" "You did exactly what you should have done," Sarah interrupted. My cover was meant to be convincing, and it was. The mission required me to be invisible, and your team's treatment of me confirmed that the cover was working. As the immediate crisis was resolved, Sarah began preparing for the next phase of the investigation. Martinez's arrest would likely prompt his handlers to take countermeasures, and there might be other compromised personnel who would try to cover their tracks. Her months of careful observation had identified several other individuals who warranted closer scrutiny. Admiral Richardson requested a private briefing on the situation, and Sarah found herself facing the challenging task of explaining her investigation without compromising ongoing operations. The Admiral listened intently as she outlined the months of intelligence gathering that had led to this breakthrough, nodding appreciatively at the thoroughness of her work. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant Commander," the Admiral said when she finished her briefing. "This kind of patience and dedication is exactly what we need in intelligence operations." The following weeks proved to be a whirlwind of debriefings, investigations, and carefully coordinated operations designed to uncover the full extent of the security breach. Sarah found herself at the center of the largest counterintelligence operation the Navy had conducted in years, working directly with federal agencies to trace the network that had been receiving classified information from Martinez. The investigation revealed a sophisticated espionage ring that had been operating for nearly 2 years, with tentacles reaching into multiple military installations across the country. Martinez was just one node in a network that included defense contractors, foreign nationals, and at least 3 other active-duty military personnel. The intelligence Sarah had gathered during her months undercover proved crucial in identifying and apprehending the other conspirators. Sarah's role in the investigation had to remain classified, which meant she couldn't receive public recognition for her work. However, within the intelligence community, word of her successful operation spread quickly. She received commendations from the Director of Naval Intelligence, the Secretary of the Navy, and even a personal letter from the Joint Chiefs of Staff acknowledging her exceptional service. More importantly to Sarah, the information that had been compromised was contained before it could endanger any active operations. The SEALs, who had unknowingly been training alongside a traitor, were debriefed and reassured that their safety remained paramount. Several planned missions were modified as a precautionary measure, but no American lives were lost as a result of the security breach. 3 months after Martinez's arrest, Sarah received orders to report to the Pentagon for a special assignment. She assumed it was another undercover operation, perhaps requiring her to infiltrate a different military community suspected of security violations. The prospect excited her, as she had discovered a talent for deep cover work that she never knew she possessed. When she arrived at the Pentagon, Sarah was surprised to be escorted to a conference room filled with senior officers from all branches of the military. At the head of the table sat Admiral Richardson, along with officials she recognized from the intelligence community and several faces she didn't know but whose bearing suggested high-ranking authority. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez," Admiral Richardson began, "your work on Operation Silent Helper has had ramifications far beyond what you might have imagined. The intelligence network you uncovered was providing information to hostile foreign governments that could have compromised American military operations worldwide." Sarah listened with growing amazement as the Admiral outlined the full scope of what her investigation had prevented. The espionage ring had been planning to sell information about SEAL training methods, equipment specifications, and operational procedures to the highest bidder. Some of this intelligence had already changed hands, requiring the military to modify tactics and procedures across multiple special operations units. Your willingness to sacrifice your ego and operate in anonymity for months demonstrates the highest qualities we expect from our intelligence officers, continued Admiral Richardson. You placed mission success above personal recognition, and that dedication has saved American lives. The meeting continued with briefings from various agencies about how the investigation had evolved since Martinez's arrest. Foreign intelligence operatives had been identified and expelled from the country. Defense contractors with suspicious ties had lost their security clearances. Several ongoing military research projects had been relocated to more secure facilities. Sarah realized that her months of being treated as invisible support staff had actually made her one of the most consequential intelligence officers of her generation. The irony wasn't lost on her that some of her greatest professional success had come while pretending to be professionally insignificant. Following the briefings, Admiral Richardson asked Sarah to remain for a private conversation. She wondered if she was about to receive another undercover assignment, perhaps even more challenging than the previous one. "Lieutenant Commander, I have a proposition for you," the Admiral said. "The success of your operation has highlighted the need for more sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities within our special operations community. I'm recommending you for promotion to commander and assignment as the new Director of Special Operations Security." Sarah felt her breath catch. The position the Admiral was describing would make her one of the youngest officers ever to hold such a significant intelligence role. It would also mean leaving behind undercover work for a high-profile leadership position that would put her at the forefront of military intelligence operations. "Sir, I'm honored by your confidence, but I want you to know that I've come to appreciate the value of working behind the scenes," Sarah replied. "My recent experience taught me that some of the most important work happens when nobody knows you're doing it." Admiral Richardson smiled. "That attitude is exactly why you're perfect for this job. The position requires someone who understands that real security often depends on people who never receive credit for their contributions. You'll be overseeing other officers conducting operations similar to what you just completed." 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself back at the Nevada training facility. But this time, her circumstances were dramatically different. She was there to observe a new security protocol being implemented based on lessons learned from her investigation. The SEALs conducting training exercises now operated under enhanced counterintelligence measures designed to prevent future security breaches. As she watched the training unfold, Sarah spotted several support staff members who reminded her of her own recent experience. She wondered if any of them might be undercover intelligence officers conducting their own investigations. The thought made her smile, knowing that the invisible helpers might be the most important people on the entire base. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez approached her during a break in the exercise. "Commander Martinez, I wanted to apologize for how we treated you during your time here. If we had known—" "Chief, please don't apologize," Sarah interrupted. "Your team's behavior was exactly what the mission required. You treated me like any other support contractor, which allowed me to do my job effectively. Your professionalism actually contributed to the operation's success." That evening, Admiral Richardson arrived for a formal ceremony recognizing Sarah's promotion and new assignment. The event was small and low-key, attended only by personnel with appropriate security clearances who were already aware of her role in the recent operation. As the Admiral prepared to address the gathering, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months earlier, she had been a relatively unknown intelligence officer, accepting what seemed like a routine undercover assignment. Now she was taking command of one of the Navy's most critical security programs. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Richardson began, "it's my honor to present Commander Sarah Martinez, our new Director of Special Operations Security. Commander Martinez has demonstrated that sometimes the most important victories are won by those who work in the shadows, unrecognized and unacknowledged until their mission is complete." The Admiral paused and turned to face Sarah directly. "Commander, your willingness to endure months of anonymity while conducting one of our most successful counterintelligence operations embodies the selfless service we expect from our finest officers." Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone present, Admiral Richardson stepped forward and rendered Sarah her first salute as a commander. The moment was particularly meaningful because it represented not just her promotion, but recognition of her transition from invisible helper to acknowledged leader. As Sarah returned the salute, She thought about all the people who had overlooked her during the past 6 months, treating her as just another face in the crowd. Now she was being saluted by the Admiral himself in recognition of work that had protected American lives and national security. The ceremony concluded with Sarah assuming her new responsibilities, knowing that she would soon be sending other officers into similar undercover situations. Her experience as the invisible helper would guide her in preparing them for the psychological challenges of operating in anonymity while conducting vital intelligence work. Later that evening, as Sarah reviewed files related to her new position, she received a message from one of the SEALs who had been part of the training exercise where Martinez was arrested. The message was brief but meaningful. "Ma'am, thank you for watching our backs even when we didn't know you were there." Sarah smiled as she read the message, knowing that it captured the essence of intelligence work. The most important victories often belong to people who couldn't be publicly acknowledged, whose success was measured not by recognition, but by the disasters they prevented and the lives they protected. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from her new staff informing her about 3 ongoing investigations that required her immediate attention. As Sarah gathered her files and prepared to dive into her new responsibilities, she realized that her days of being invisible were over, but her commitment to protecting those who serve in the shadows was just beginning.